Now we're getting into, I want to talk a little bit about speckled trout coming in the spring and where they're at now. You know, there's a lot of speckled trout that spend their winters in like boat basin style areas in places where there's low current flow. They got deep water with some shallow water nearby, but mostly they're concerned with getting into water where they know they don't have to work a lot with current, like boat basin areas, like boat basin in Carolina Beach, marinas, Bald Head Marina, St. James Marina, Harbor Village Marina, Bradley Creek Marina. They like black mud bottoms. They like a lot of area where they don't have to do a lot of work, and they will readily take soft plastic grubs all winter. Now this is the one this one right here, the old standby, the old good old. I ain't never met a speckled trout. I wouldn't eat that, no, you know, anytime. And this is what comes home on your rod. You might leave with a lot of other plans, but this is what always comes home on mine. And these are just examples of different soft plastics and colors that you might want to try for the speckled trout. And in the wintertime, when it's really cold like this, an unweighted DOA shrimp, just tie it on. Work in some of these boat basin areas that don't have a lot of current. Search with something that sinks and work something slow, because the trout are a little sluggish, but they'll start coming around. And they'll really start coming around in April, in the second week of April, if we got some warm weather. Then, as a rule of thumb, I start out early mornings. I like to use topwater baits. And a topwater bait is a bait that stays actually on the surface. It doesn't go under at all. It's on the very top of the water. And this brand, called a skitterwalk, this is one of the oldest lures around, the head and spook. Now they both work in the same fashion. Twitch, whine, twitch, whine, twitch, whine. And it's almost a motion like patting your head and rubbing your stomach. It takes a minute to get used to. But once you get in the mechanical rhythm of it, you can make this lure dart from side to side. With every twitch, the lure glides about 1.5 feet, and then it sits like this. You twitch, and what you're trying to do is bounce a little bit of slack line and get this lure to glide and pop back up. And it's really not all that difficult. And with colors with topwater plugs, I like using really white, bright chartreuse, orange, bright colors, because I use these lures early in the morning or late in the evening most of the time. And one thing that helps you with these bright colored lures, the fish don't mind. They don't mind the colors being unnatural looking. They eat them just fine. They're easier for you physically to keep up with though. You bomb a long topwater plug somewhere right at sunrise when it's going to really be the time to use it. It's hard to see them, especially if it's a dark colored lure. You walk it back halfway and you stop and you twitch it and you're like, nah, I can't find the plug. It's easier with a real bright colored lure like that. It's easier for you to see. And I know that the fish don't mind it, because if they're looking up in a dark sky and there's silhouette in the bottom of this plug, it most likely just looks like a dark silhouette.
Jamie, you're saying with cold water, use the same plug?
No, this is starting to get a little later. This is into April, you know, when it starts getting a little bit warmer. Now, I'm targeting speckled trout right now. All I do is just very slowly fish soft plastics in some of these areas, and until it starts to come into April and it starts to get warming. And that's when they'll readily start taking just about everything when we have some solid warm weather and a couple warmer patterns come along, and say the water gets 60, 58 degrees. They will eat these artificial topwater plugs. And a good way, you know, the fish have moved out of that point. They've moved out of the boat basin areas. They're on the waterways. They're in banks areas where there's near estuaries and flats and creeks, like say for instance from Carolina Beach to Wrightsville Beach and all these big bays in between behind Masonboro. They all have these little spits and channels that come off of them. And you'll find that they come off in different diagonal ways, and a lot of times they have high shell banks on the waterway. And these fish are going to start working towards the waterway to these shell bank areas near these estuaries, preparing for a spawn. And that's when in the spring, these big, huge groups of males come into these areas and get together and start drumming, because they're looking to start spawning in the 1st of May here. So that when they get out into those areas, they're looking to actively start putting on some weight, eating, and that's when you'll find that they'll start readily taking all this stuff. As a rule of thumb, early, sunrise to 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, topwater is great. When the sun starts getting up a little higher than that, they don't like to stare right into the sunlight. And that's when I go to a subsurface bait, like an X-Rap, my Rapala, a twitch bait like a Miradine by Miralure, and they make a lot of different ones, but a twitch bait, and there's this Yozuri shrimp is also another twitch bait, and these are called suspending jerk baits, which means that the lure doesn't sink it doesn't float. But when you throw it, it just balances. It just sits wherever you leave it in the column. So when you throw the lure out, let's say the X-Rat, you throw it out, a long cast, click it over, pull it down, you kind of wind yourself tight, pull it down, and that's going to be your first pull down. This lure stops. It goes, and it stops. It doesn't move. It doesn't float up. It doesn't sink. It just kind of sits there and sways. So once you got it to that point, you pull it down, you just crack, crack, and the lure goes doop, doop, and it suspends. It just sits there, doop, doop, and it suspends, and that's when they can't stand it, and that's when they pile up on it. They like that suspending twitch bait, that erratic motion. You can either be mechanical, just do twitch, twitch. You can do one. You can mix it up with threes. And you're going to find that when you're close to these strike zone areas, along these shell banks on the intracoastal water where you see large, white, old oyster beds that are dead now, but they're steep. They like to line up near places like that where the banks are steep, near these spits for these sounds. And you get long parallel casts with some of these shorelines. And the longer the cast, the better with these lures for speckled trout. They like to stalk them a little ways sometimes. But while you're in the first 6, 8 feet off the bank and near the bank where they're going to be hanging, you want to don't rush it out of there. You know, work it kind of slower when you're close to the bank, and then pick it up and work it on back. Sometimes you'll get some bites close to the boat, so it's best to fish it the whole way, but you can pick up speed once you get going towards the boat. And that's after the sun has come up a little bit, and then back to the plastics when the sun's in its full part of the day. You'll find that when the sun is at 12 o'clock, they seem to go deeper, and a lot of times the plastics are the way to go. And I mean, I've seen the speckled trout fishing get great in late April and 1st of May in Carolina Beach Inlet, where all these guys are fishing in the fall for the trout, and no one's around in the spring. They're not thinking that. They're not thinking about sea trout, and they're there because no one's fishing for them. So take that into consideration in the springtime when the water's in the upper 50s, close to 60. There's areas where you caught those trout in the fall. They're going to be there in the spring probably too, and they're going to be getting ready to set up on some of these places for the spawn in 1st of May and stuff, where these males are going to congregate.